Hey, it's Verity here on my YouTube channel and blog, Pretty Little Button. If you are new here, I make paper crafting tutorials for the everyday crafter. In today's video, we're going to create 3 cards where we'll be using pearl embossing powders with vellum. What I love about pearl embossing powders is the soft sheen they have and how they elevate your heat embossing for elegant, stunning cards. I use vellum and pearl embossing powder in 3 slightly different ways, so let's get started. For this first card, we are going to create a large embossed piece of vellum using the Altenew Dotted Diamonds background stamp, and I'm placing this into my MISTI stamping platform. As this is a large stamp, the MISTI ensures I can stamp in the exact same position again if I haven't completely stamped the whole background the first time round. As I've placed the vellum in my MISTI, I've used an anti-static bag over the piece, as although while remove the static from their powders, vellum is known to hold static quite a bit, and as this is quite a large stamp, I wanted to ensure that I got no stray powders. Next, I've inked this up with my WOW Clear Ultra Slow Drying Embossing ink, and as I've mentioned, I'm doing this twice just to make sure I get a really good full stamped impression. So for this piece, I'm covering this in gold pearl embossing powder. When heat set, it is a stunning gold colour. Now you could use normal gold embossing powder and you're probably thinking, why don't I? But I find that this pearl embossing powder is a lovely soft gold when the light doesn't catch it. And then when the light does, it turns a lovely bright gold shine. So it has a lovely difference in sheen. I'll finish this card later on, so let's move on to the next vellum piece. So for this vellum piece, we are going to use the Altenew Dot Art stamp set, and I'm using one of the large dotted leaf branches. Again, I'm using my MISTI stamp to stamp the image in clear ultra slow drying embossing ink. And for this piece, I'm using the violet pearl embossing powder. Now the colour of this pearl, as you will see, depends on what colour the cardstock is that you're embossing over. As vellum is pale, when this is heat set, it's going to appear more of a white pearl embossing powder. However, when the embossing powder catches the light, it gives off a lovely soft violet shade. Now, this was really hard to photograph, so you can't really see it in the photographs, but I'm hoping here in the video you might be able to see a lovely soft sheen in the video. I mean, you can really see it in real life and it looks lovely. Now for the last vellum piece, I'm going to stamp 2 little flowers. They look like snowdrops to me. And as I've mentioned, the colour on which the embossing sits affects the colour you see with pearl embossing powders. So this time, I'm first of all stamping the flowers onto vellum, but in Catherine Pooler Sugared Lavender ink. And I'm doing this twice. As the vellum is not as porous as paper, the ink will sit more on top of the vellum. And also, Catherine Pooler inks stay a little bit wetter for longer than normal dye inks, so we can cover this with embossing powder. So this time I'm covering it with white and pearl embossing powder. So as this heat sets, the white powder melts and creates a pearl embossing, but it will create a pearl embossing of the ink we've used. So here we're getting a pearl sugared lavender embossing colour. Now let's turn these into cards. So with the dotted leaf, I'm going to use this to create a vellum emboss strip. I've got a piece of Gina K Wild Lilac cardstock trimmed down to 4 1/4 inch wide and about 2 1/4, 2.5 inches tall. Here I'm then using double-sided tape to adhere the vellum to the panel, and then I'm adhering a second panel of the same size over the top, just sandwiching the vellum inside, and it hides the adhesive. For the bottom edge, I'm also adding a small strip, and I find it useful to do this with my guillotine as I can line it up straight and also make sure that my strip will create at least a 5.5 inches long card panel. I then just flip it over and add another strip again to hide the adhesive. And now, if my card measure is a little longer, I just need to trim down the strip. To add a little bit more interest to the card, but without actually distracting from that heat embossing, I'm adding some ombre ink blending to the card panel. Now, you could have done this before you adhered the vellum and you won't risk any getting on the vellum, but at the time I only thought of this after I'd done that. So to protect my vellum, I'm using some Heavy Doodle memo tape to cover up the vellum. Then I'm using some blending brushes and circular motions to blend Royal Treatment Catherine Pooler ink from the bottom upwards and fading this out as I get nearer the top. These brushes allow you to get a lovely soft blend and no harsh lines. So once I was happy with the first colour, I'm then going in with a Queen for a Day ink just to intensify the purple at the bottom of the panel, really darken it up a bit. Again, I'm applying it in the same manner with circular motions, but I'm just this time not going quite as far up the card panel. Just right at the bottom, I'm also going in with Blackjack Catherine Pooler ink just to give it a little bit more of a darker edge and really intensify that colour down there. In addition, I then moved the memo tape so I could also add ink to the bottom panel just to give it a continuous ink blend up the card panel to give that ombre look. So to be able to turn that panel into a full card, I'm also using another piece of card measuring at 6 inches by 4¼ inches wide, and I have scored it ½ an inch from the top to create a fold line. I've used my bone folder to fold this over, and now you've got a small hinge to add the card panel to, so this will create a top folding card. For the sentiment, I am just stamping "Hello, sending love and hugs" from the Dotted Art stamp set. I've covered this so I've stamped it in clear embossing ink, and I'm covering it with Opaque bright white embossing powder. This white embossing powder just really pops off that dark purple we've created with the ink blending on the card. For the embossed background, I'm going to turn it into a gatefold card. So I've trimmed a piece of Gina K's cardstock to 4¾ inches by 5½ inches tall. And then I'm going to score ½ an inch at each end so that when I've folded these flaps, it should measure 4¼ by 5½ inches. The background heat embossed vellum was trimmed down to make 2 pieces measuring 5½ inches tall by 2⅛ inches wide. And then I'm adhering these to the folded flaps that we've created on the card base using some double-sided tape and adhering them onto the card. I've also then cut 2 small strips measuring at ½ an inch by 5 inches tall just to put over the top to adhere that adhesive, and it sandwiches the vellum in, keeping it nice and stable. The sentiment from this card comes from the Altenew Reason to Smile stamp set, and this was just heat embossed onto a piece of wild lilac Gina K cardstock before adhering it to the front of the card. I'm only adhering it to one flap of the gatefold, and this will then allow you to open the gatefold but also keeps the flaps closed. For the last card, I've used that dotted diamond stamp again just to heat emboss with white and pearl embossing powder onto a piece of white card. This will just give a nice tone-on-tone detail to the background but doesn't distract from the main focal element. So the 2 flowers were fussy cut out, and then I've placed foam pads behind the embossing. So the heat embossing is a really great way to hide adhesive when using vellum. They have been mounted onto the card, and then I'm using a sentiment on this card from a digital stamp set. This is from Graciela Designs More Than You Know digital stamp set, and I foiled it in silver Wow Fab Foil. Now it's hard to photograph these foiled sentiments when they're on black card, but it does read "Embrace the beauty within," and I've trimmed that sentiment up into small strips to foam mount onto the card panel. The whole panel was then adhered to a lovely lavender card base. All 3 cards were finished off with a selection of Lucy's Cards Sprinkles crystal clear circles, and these were scattered around the cards in various clusters to give more interest and help lead the eye around the card. Hopefully this has inspired you to get your pearl embossing powders out next time you use vellum, and given you several different ways to incorporate them into your paper crafts. Pearl embossing powders are a fantastic way to add a touch of elegance to your projects. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up, and why not subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to be notified when the next video is up. For a 10% discount at the Wow Embossing Powder shop, just enter the code you can see on screen. Also, why not check out this other video for some more inspiration. Until next time, happy crafting!